Welcome to another episode of Ramble Mosey. I'm your host, Jonathan Jaros, and joining us today is Megan Motil from Parallel Solutions and one of our favorite partners to work with, MaryKay O'Donnell from the Land Trust Alliance. You will undoubtedly hear us refer to her as MK very affectionately for the next hour or so. MaryKay's been with the Land Trust Alliance now 18 years plus, which is phenomenal. And quite honestly, and a credit to her, when folks talk about the Midwest program and capacity building in the Great Lakes and Midwest region, they're talking about MaryKay. So MaryKay, welcome.
Thank you, Jonathan. I am thrilled to be here. Thanks so much for inviting me.
And Megan, welcome back once again. Always appreciate hanging out with you.
Thanks. Happy to be here again.
So MK, some kind of basic housekeeping stuff maybe. The Land Trust Alliance is a national organization that obviously supports, works as a trade association for the country's land trust, land conservancies. What does that mean? Both sort of aspirationally and then on a day-to-day basis.
We have close to 1,000 nonprofit organizations across the country that are established to protect land and water resources. They are called land trusts. And in 1982, land trusts came together because working one-on-one is tough, especially when you're a place-based organization and you don't necessarily have overlap with someone that you can learn from. They came together to form the Land Trust Exchange, which eventually became the Land Trust Alliance. So there is many benefits to joining together. As the Land Trust Alliance, we bring a national perspective to land trusts. It is complicated work, and it's hard work, and it's incredibly rewarding, the things that land trusts are doing. But we don't want everybody to have to recreate the wheel and figure it out themselves. So we're able to take the collective wisdom of 1,000 land trusts and give that wisdom to every individual organization. And that comes in the way of education. We have everything from webinars to a multi-day conference that we hold every fall. We call it Rally. We have a conservation defense program that helps land trusts with making sure that the lands they have protected stand the test of time. We also have a land and climate program. We have an advocacy program. So as organizations like Heart of the Lakes are the voice of land trusts in Michigan. For Michigan, the Land Trust Alliance is the voice for policy for land trusts in Washington, D.C. And we also have, and I'm sure I'm going to forget some of our programs, but I work in our field services division. And what that means is we are the folks that are on the ground working with land trusts one-on-one. Sometimes it's you're lending a shoulder or an ear. Sometimes you're arranging a mentoring project or program. Sometimes you're providing individualized training. Things like peer groups are huge for us. Again, because land trusts are place-based, they don't have as many opportunities to meet one another. So we arrange space for peers. We have a new executive directors peer group. We have a acquisition and stewardship peer group, urban conservation peer group, and so on. It gives them a space to learn from one another, to share. We firmly believe that everyone has something to learn and something to teach, and those peer groups can bring that together. I'm sure that there are other things that I have forgotten. Oh, we also have an independent program of the Land Trust Alliance that is the Land Trust Accreditation Commission. So as land trusts came together in 1982 and subsequent to that, one of the things they realized was we think we're doing a good job and we think we're doing things right, but is there some sort of written cookbook that could help us know that? And so the Land Trust Alliance promulgates land trust standards and practices, which are developed and owned by the land trust community. And that is guidelines for technical and ethical operation of a land trust. And a couple of decades later, land trust started saying, okay, I'm pretty sure we're following standards and practices and we're really doing great work. How do I tell someone else that? How do I tell our members, our supporters, our funders, where is our good housekeeping seal of approval? And from that call from the land trust community, we created the Land Trust Accreditation Commission, which is verification of implementing standards and practices. Really many, many benefits to accreditation. And about half of our land trusts are accredited, half are not. Does not mean whether you're accredited or not, doesn't mean you're, good or bad, operating well or not. It's not for everyone, but it has certainly improved the operations of land trust across the country and has risen all boats.
What not everyone might realize, and I love the word promulgate, by the way. I don't think I'd be able to pull that off in a sentence. But what I don't know that everyone realizes is the work of the land conservancies, as we call them in Michigan, or land trusts across the country. There's a pretty audacious promise that's built in there, which is that we're going to do this, we're going to protect this land forever. And folks always ask, they're like, what does forever mean? Is that like till I die? Is that till the land changes hands? Or like, no, forever. And so that business practice, those standards and practices you mentioned, really are, I think, the core of what's so important to keeping the community healthy and frankly also connected.
For folks who might be listening who may not, be steeped in the land trust community, could you talk about the difference between a land trust and other types of conservation organizations like a watershed council or a conservation district or a lake association? What makes a land trust, and what kind of tools or approaches are they using that other conservation groups may not be using?
Megan, that is a great question. Thanks so much for asking that. The short answer is you're a land trust if you think you're a land trust. We define land trusts as nonprofit 501c3, which means you have federal nonprofit status. So charitable organizations established to protect land through owning land, through protecting private land, through conservation easements, which are permanent agreements that protect property, and organizations that steward land. So land trust is organization that acquires, protects, and stewards land for conservation purposes. Conservation may be natural land conservation. It may be agricultural or working lands. It might be timberland. It might be scenic views. That definition goes far and wide. Land trusts work in cooperation with those other groups that you mentioned. So with watershed councils and water protection organizations, with RC&Ds, with counties and other conservation groups. And we also have national conservation organizations like the Conservation Fund, the Nature Conservancy, Trust for Public Land, American Farmland Trust, which are conservation organizations and land trusts kind of all mixed together. Jonathan, I guess I would ask you too, thinking about the difference between a conservation organization that is not a land trust and a land trust. How would you define that?
In a really nerdy way, unfortunately, and it's been an interesting topic of conversation recently. And in Michigan, at least, the enabling legislation doesn't provide for anything referencing a land trust or a land conservancy. And in fact, Michigan's judicial system has preferred the term land conservancy versus land trust, so there isn't confusion with community land trusts and real estate trusts and things like that. But the fun nerd part of it is that in Michigan law, it's actually embedded in tax code, and organizations are referred to as qualified conservation organizations. And it's been fun, I guess, for lack of a different term lately. Folks have asked, they're like, well, well, qualified seems like an awfully harsh term. Like that's a quality. Like how do you know quality? You know it when you see it. I'm like, no, it's not an adjective actually. It's the legal term. It's the legalese. So in Michigan, at least, a qualified conservation organization can be any number of things, and that's actually really more of a reference to the tools that are allowed to be used than it is the type of organization. So I think the part that's been important for us collectively as a movement has been that it really is a self-assigned family. There's an artist and author named Semi-Rad who has a really nice caricature that says anything can be a taco if you have a tortilla and some enthusiasm. And that's kind of the land trust community as well, the land conservancy community. Like it's not so prescribed that you must be this, because as you pointed out, I think really smartly, there's lots of adaptations and lots of local flavor to how the conservancies have developed over time, and I think that's what makes it kind of magical too. All right, I mean, who else gets to invent themselves based on the locale they're in over and over? MaryKay, one of the things Megan and I were talking about offline is the significant movement. So if anything can be a taco, the taco has evolved with some spices and some flavors over time. What are some of the things that you're seeing, maybe specific to the Midwest or the Great Lakes region? What are some of the things that you're seeing that land conservancies have tackled successfully in terms of trends and culture shift? And then I suppose the flip of that is also where are some of the holes they've fallen into, whether intentionally or not?
So, I've been in the land conservation movement for essentially forever. So I have definitely seen and been a part of trends over time. One of the trends, you brought up the topic of permanence, and that land trusts are dedicated to being here forever. So one of the big trends that has happened over time, and I think successfully, so in the Michigan Land Conservancy movement or community and the Great Lakes, is the professionalism of the organizations. It's just nearly impossible to believe that we could be here forever if we, don't have the systems in place, if we don't have the capacity to ensure that we can adjust to different times and be here forever. So definitely that professionalism of the community. Also, I think partnerships. I do believe that when early in the land conservation movement, land trusts, were very focused on where they were. And I think over time, we have all grown personally and professionally to understand that we need to work together and we need to have partnerships. And there is benefit for both parties, but also it amplifies the conservation impact that we can have when we're working together. And whether that is with a neighboring land conservancy, or it is with a Native American tribe, or it's with a watershed organization, or your local township or local county, having those partnerships is really important, and has expanded land conservation across the state and across the Great Lakes in ways that are hard to quantify. Most land conservancies that I know have a very similar origin story. It was a dedicated group of people that saw something happening in their community, and they said, we can't lose that, and fill in the blank. We can't lose that water quality. Some of the groups started around water quality. We can't lose that prairie. We can't lose that mountainside. And then over time, that small group of people gelled and became this professional organization. The focus was on getting the land, and first it was on acquiring the fee title. We own this land. And there was a kind of implied, we'll worry about what we do with the land later. Well, then later came about 20 years ago. And land conservancies started to realize protecting the land isn't just acquisition. It is stewardship. It is restoration. It is caring for that land. we have to, as a land trust community, own the fact that we were exclusive in our practices for many decades. Conservation writ large did not include everyone that was deserving of having access to nature. And everyone is deserving of having access to nature. All of us who work in this, we have our own stories about how we fell in love with nature, what it means to us today to go for a walk in the woods, to just be out and raining and seeing spring wildflowers. So excited to see spring wildflowers soon. We all have that personal story. And there are a lot of people in our world that do not have that personal story because they didn't feel invited. They weren't included to be a part of this community. That is changing. We need to do a much better job internally within our organizations of making sure that we have people that represent the communities in which we live. I know that it's true for every movement out there, but for land trusts, their definitions of inclusion really do depend on where they live and who is around them and who is part of their community. And we just need to do a much better job of making sure that everyone in the community feels welcome and that every faction of the community is represented, whether that is ability, age, ethnicity, economic status, education, all of the things, geographic, right? There's a huge movement to say it's great that we have those places out there that are wilderness and that are wonderful places to spend the day hiking if you have the right equipment and if you can get there. And so one of the ways in which land trusts have started to adjust their practices is to be looking at nature close to home. How can everybody on a daily basis go out and get their dose of nature?
I'm wondering if you can share just some examples or case studies of projects in Michigan or the Midwest that illustrate what you're talking about.
One that I think illustrates a lot of what we're talking about is with the Land Conservancy of West Michigan. So they are based in Grand Rapids. They have Lake Michigan, Lakeshore. They have Pere Marquette rivers. They have forests. They have farmland. They have cities. They have everything. What they didn't have was a place in Grand Rapids where they're located. And so they worked very hard over years to identify a place in the city that they could help to protect, to make available to people in the city for their outdoor recreation and nature activities. So the Land Conservancy of West Michigan worked with Blandford Nature Center on acquiring and restoring a golf course that was adjacent to the nature center. And I saw it about a year and a half after they had acquired it, and I could not believe how different it looked. It was amazing. It's really cool because it has some of the infrastructure that allow for better access to a nature preserve. The key part of this was, a couple of key parts, was working in concert with Blandford Nature Center, to work in conjunction with them. But another key part was this nature preserve is on a bus route. So you don't have to have a car to get there. And it is hundreds of acres. You don't have to have a car to get there. You can go there with your family and you can have a wonderful Saturday morning walk with, generations of your family walking together. And now I have goosebumps just thinking about it. But that is, that's to me is like one of those projects that you really see has kind of all of the elements. I mean, it was water quality protection. There was a hidden creek, a water, a river that was covered. And Jonathan, I'm going to ask you for some more details on this because you're shaking. I can see you. That they daylighted, they uncovered it, and the water, they're working really hard with federal agencies, state agencies, private philanthropy, foundations, private giving, to restore this property for better water quality, for better habitat protection. And it is amazing. And better access. Jonathan, what can you add to that story?
Well, just that I love that example, right? Because that's also the and I think I can say this. I think I can say this without any objections from them. It's also the evolution of the organization in real time, right? So they've done some amazing work, some beautiful work on big coastal preserves over the years, and the Highlands was really, I think, one of the first, maybe not the first, but one of the early efforts, not just in their area, but also in the state, to really think deeply about what you described as the partnership with others, reflecting what the community needs are. And then, frankly, also bringing what I'll call the conservation message to some new folks as well. So the location of the Highlands means that when they do a burn, there's a much deeper and longer conversation with the community around it, the surrounding neighborhoods and things like that, about what it means and why are we using this particular stewardship practice and what's going to be the long-term benefit. Daylighting the creek as well. I mean, those are the things those features were always there. They were just quite literally hidden from folks. That it was always there. It was just literally hidden from sight as well as hidden from use. And then kind of the next evolutions, if you will, of that organization's work. Dune Harbor Park in Muskegon County, thinking about an area that didn't traditionally have the same kind of access to natural resources. And Dune Harbor is actually a restored sand mine. And then the next evolution of that also then is thinking about how they might work in Muskegon and Muskegon Heights. And so really, like, it's entry for the organization in a meaningful way into different communities than they might have historically served. And then the real deep one, which I think is awesome as well to think about for them, that they're thinking about, which is just really fun to watch and to applaud. So the conversation with Muskegon Heights as an example, Pete DeBoer, who was an earlier guest and used to work at the Land Conservancy, always sort of frames it for us that the conversation in Muskegon County is, how can we get more people to the beach? How can we access the Lake Michigan shoreline? And if you go just a couple of miles in from the shoreline, the conversation in those communities isn't about how can we access the shoreline, it's how can we even get across the road to think about accessing the shoreline. And the Conservancy has really been a strong partner, and the Conservancies in Michigan in plural have become strong partners in thinking differently, I think, about those conversations. So the projects the places are very emblematic of the work. And then I think it's really fun and cool to watch the evolution of the organization, thinking about how we tackle these bigger challenges. And just to call it kind of like it is, you mentioned this early on in a very tactful way, which I appreciate. There is a rich white bias to the history of land conservancies in the country, land trusts in the country. And I think that's power and wealth that can continue to be leveraged to do good work, not to run away from it. But at the same time, it's also a constituency that I think all of us have come to realize isn't the sole constituency, and maybe shouldn't continue to be the primary constituency. Megan, you are lucky enough to work with conservation groups across the country and in the Great Lakes in particular. Are you seeing these same things play out in the Great Lakes region across the board?
I am. Yeah, I think folks are thinking differently about what it means to be a community-based organization. And they're maybe thinking and asking the question of folks outside of the circles maybe they've traditionally worked with. Like, what do you actually need from your land trust? And I know, MaryKay, you and I have talked a little bit in the past about that, about some of the emerging threats and opportunities on the ground that land trusts are responding to in different ways, whether it's related to flooding or related to restoration of habitats that are, connected to places folks care about who have lived on the land for time immemorial, who are Native Americans, and land trust working in collaboration with tribes. So I do see that happening more. And I'm curious, MaryKay, if you have any stories to share just related to, those type of opportunities. Or I also know water quality is something land trusts are focusing on. a bit differently. I think land conservancies have always known that protecting land means they're protecting water, but it seems like they're maybe talking about it differently or just framing it differently related to their work. I'm curious if you have any thoughts on those.
Yes, I have to say that's probably one of the trends that I missed earlier, and I'm sure, I'll think of others. You're absolutely right. Land conservancies have always known that what they are doing on the land protects the water. We know, everybody knows that. What happens on the land flows into the water. But it isn't until recently, and I'm going to say, the last decade or so, um, uh, that land conservancies, by and large, this isn't everybody, but by and large, land conservancies are now incorporating water quality protection into their strategic conservation goals. Where before it was almost a byproduct of, now they are looking at, we need to protect drinking water for people. Where are those drinking water recharge zones? Not only are land trusts incorporating that into their work so that the projects they are choosing are beneficial to water quality protection. They're also talking about it more. So we had a really interesting water quality communications project that we were doing, and this is many, many years ago. And I looked on websites for land trusts and what they were saying about water. And projects that were all about water didn't mention water. Not in press releases, not in newsletters, not on websites. And I was like, wait, what? This is clean water for drinking, clean water for swimming, clean water for fish, and clean water for recreation and boating and habitat. There isn't a person that lives in the Great Lakes that doesn't feel that Great Lakes water flowing through our veins. We need, love, and want clean water, good water quality. And land trusts are embracing that wholeheartedly, changing the way that they are approaching their projects and changing who they're working with as partners to make sure that water quality is more at the forefront.
We hear that a lot from our partners out west in particular, where obviously water quality and quantity issues are at the forefront. And the only thing I think that any of us have come to is that we're so surrounded by it, like literally surrounded by it, that we just take it for granted. Especially in the Great Lakes region, it's like, well, of course we have water. And you've got the other 85% of the country looking at us going, that's nice that you do, but we don't. So I think a lot of that comes from just that abundance theory, right? Where like, of course we've got it. And it becomes almost, maybe not background noise, but it becomes an expectation, that so much so that we forget to talk about it. And of course, then there's that added layer of our Midwest humility, where we just don't talk about our greatest assets the most. The other piece you touched on too, MaryKay, is, you and I and some others have been working in the background to help support the efforts of a startup land conservancy within the city of Detroit. And that's been fascinating to watch, I think in particular, because they're asking what tools are available. They're thinking very directly about the community's needs that they want to serve, and they're trying to align the two of them, right? So they're trying to take the traditional tools along with community needs and sort of crosswalk them where possible. And part of what they're finding is that the expectation about the tool use will need to change, which I think is an important conversation as well. And what I mean by that is, historic use of conservation easements and fee simple acquisitions, what we think of as sort of traditional real estate transactions. Those work, but the complexity of the landscape in our urban areas and the Great Lakes don't necessarily allow for the same sort of simplicity of application. So that's been one piece that's been really fascinating to watch. The other side of it is, I'm not sure if this is the right phrasing, but almost a return to nature, where using the Detroit example, and this is true in Grand Rapids as well, actually in Saginaw and Lansing and Flint and Benton Harbor, that the idea of a champion for nature within those contexts is oftentimes missing. And so, sticking with the Detroit example, there's lots of folks that are working on park maintenance and funding. There's lots of folks that are working on accessibility and mobility in terms of a transportation and active streets perspective. Lots of folks thinking about what it means to protect open space for festivals and gatherings, and then and food and farming as well. And when they looked at the landscape of what sort of services weren't being provided by organizations, it was the idea of protecting nature for city residents that was missing. For all the reasons you listed: stormwater reduction, heat island reduction, mental health benefits. That the natural benefits seem to be the ones sort of service that weren't being as immediately addressed. And so it's been really fascinating to watch the rectification of the tools, historic tools, to a new context. But then also in some ways that return to nature idea that the work and the conservancy startup is to be focused on nature preservation, still with people in mind, but thinking about how those two play together really deeply. There's also a bit of a movement towards not using the term land trust or land conservancy because of some of the historic implications that come along with it. And so that's been also fascinating to watch. And that's not just Michigan, but to watch this idea of we want to be a land conservancy. We don't want to call ourselves that because we want to be new and fresh, recognizing a 100-year plus history of how that work happens in the U.S., but maybe not using the same sort of terminology or phraseology on purpose.
I want to pick up on something you said there, Jonathan, about, who are the champions for nature. So as we think about sort of public sentiments about conservation, about land protection, about water quality protection, and we think about the political will for things like supporting public funding for conservation, I'm curious to know what the two of you are thinking about related to both state and federal support for conservation in Michigan and Midwest. What do you see happening, and what do you hope happens?
Remember when I said that Megan's here for the straight talk and I'm here for comedic relief? Nice softball setup there. MaryKay, do you want to tackle state and federal issues, and I can chime in with inappropriate comments?
Sure, absolutely. A couple of things. One, this particular time in our lives, we don't know what's going to happen. So I have to talk about a wider time, the forever time timeline. I'm a child of the 70s, and that is in large part what formed my desire to work for nature. And in the 1970s, our conservative parties were the ones that were in charge when we passed most of the conservation legislation. Conservation, water quality protection, air pollution reducing air pollution has always been bipartisan. And study after study after study today affirms that. Most citizens of the United States want clean air, want clean water, want natural places, want parks, want places for their children and their parents and their friends and for them to be outside. It is not a question. It is across the board. And I just believe that will continue, and that will continue. We have, I know today is about land conservancies and private land conservation, and we have a century of experience of having both public and private land conservation working in concert with one another. And it wouldn't be as successful with only one or the other. I mean, honestly, Great Smokies National Park is my favorite place in the entire world. Love going to Yellowstone. Isn't that fantastic? It is. It's fantastic. The Porcupine Mountains here in Michigan. Yes. And where am I going to go tomorrow? for a walk? Or where am I going to go tomorrow to sit and listen to birds? And so the private land conservation of being more local, being more regional, the public realm, state and federal, of being able to protect those large landscapes, they work in concert with one another. And I believe that that will continue into the future. It has been one of the world's best examples of what we do as a country. And it's hard times now, but I believe that this will stand the test of time, and we will continue to work together, rely on one another to continue to protect clean air, clean water, safe places, natural areas, working lands for people across the country, including people in Michigan and the Great Lakes.
And someone told me last week that COVID's not dead, just the hype, which I thought was kind of fun. So as we're recording this, it's effectively the 5-year anniversary of the origination of the pandemic in the United States, right? And so when we looked at the healing power of nature in Michigan, in particular, during those first couple of years, and still now, many states reliant on vast amounts of public land, and a lot of those federal facilities were closed. And this is kind of another conversation that occurs often with my colleagues in Western states. I look a little stupid because I'm like, you guys were closed? ? We have such an abundance of federal, state, and private conservation lands available to us in Michigan and in the Great Lakes that there was a difference in the access, or at least the option to go to those places. Northern Michigan in particular, Sleeping Bear Dunes National Lakeshore was closed for a period of time. The Land Conservancy properties, whether Little Traverse or Leelanau or Grand Traverse, and even our friends at Huron Pines, their properties were flooded with visitors and visitation. And some of that was a direct result of the ebb and flow between the public and private. And then, we talked a little bit about the cities before too. What we're also seeing, I think, or at least predicting we're seeing, is sort of this third arm, which is the unconsolidated, which is sort of the public-private, and then does anybody really care how it gets there as long as we're doing the work, which I think also gets us back to kind of the origin of a lot of this movement as well, is sort of like somebody's got to do it, and the way you do it is you pick up a shovel or you pick up a pen and you do the work. So many cliches about many hands, light work. In this case, it's get some dirt under your nails and it gets done. And then I guess I'd be curious for both of you. I mean, the words matter, I guess would be the nicest way to put it. Words like diversity, words like inclusion, words like access, words like climate change, 30 by 30. These have been given such a heavy political overtone. I guess I'm curious how you're seeing some of the groups you're working with navigate their values, knowing that the words they might historically have used to describe their values are now verboten, or are suggested to be verboten.
I guess I see people pausing and asking themselves, what do these words really mean? And then turning and saying, we're going to hold true to our values. We might need to describe this differently. Like I have clients who know that they serve all people in their service area. So that's what they're going to continue to say, is we're serving all people in our community so that these things are possible, so that these things happen, so that we have clean water, clean air, protected land, healthy soils, local farms, access to nature. So they're just doing the work. They're going to keep doing the work regardless of how they're naming it. The work is going to continue. And I think the actions are the most important thing in this context. So the words might change that people feel like they want to use or need to use to describe something, but the work will speak for itself.
Here. I am I'm hearing the same thing, and we're pretty early in figuring this out, really. I mean, it's been 2 months since some of the executive orders have come out that have directed some of this language. It is not a small issue. It's not an insignificant issue. Many of our land trusts have federal funding. Many of our land trusts have federal partners. So we cannot sweep it under the rug and say it's not important. It is really important, and it's very significant. And what I am hearing pretty much across the board is we are not going to we're not going to eliminate any of our programs. We're not going to change our programs. We are not going to change our values. And we may need to change the way in which we describe that. And when I start thinking about that, and honestly, I do wonder if our soundbite world has hurt us in the long run. So we've used DEI as a shortcut with the presumption that everybody agrees with what it is. And we stopped describing what we were doing because we had this shorthand of DEI, when we really want to make sure that everybody is included, and everybody is included not just in a passive way, but in an active way, and that no one is excluded. So what I am hearing from land trusts is we're not changing our values. This is something, we believe in. And the same with the Land Trust Alliance. We have not removed DEI from our website, from our communications. We are considering our partners, right? Our land trust partners and our federal agency partners in our diversity, equity, inclusion, access activities, and making sure that we are honoring another person's or another organization's decisions or requirements. Some of them are requirements. So I think it's really about defining what we're doing and how we're doing it and why we're doing it, and not those words. I'm really proud of the land trust community as a whole saying, nope, we're going forward.
I mean, I started my work in the land trust community in 2007. At that time, there weren't a lot of women even in leadership roles. It was still very, like you mentioned earlier, Jonathan, very white movement, also very male oriented. So my hope is that regardless of the words we're using, we don't go backward, and that we keep moving forward as a land trust community, as a conservation community, and including everyone in our communities as part of the future of conservation, regardless of the terminology we're using.
I have a board member who is we don't actually have cards in Michigan, but he's a card-carrying libertarian. And he is one of my favorites because he's most deeply offended by the right and the left at the same time. And part of the reason for that, which I think is also some of the spirit of the land conservancy movement, the land trust community, is this idea that there's one absolute, that there is room for a lot of ideas under the tent, and there's room for a lot of disagreement at the family dinner table too. And I think the only mistake we make, though, is when we make the insistence that there is one way to think. And I feel like that's what we're seeing right now in particular is a lot of semantic backlash and a lot of program backlash and things like that are making those hard statements that this you can't think that one way. This is the way that you're supposed to think. And that's where I believe strongly that the error comes in, especially as related to the deep impact in communities themselves. I do worry also, though. I've joked a few times about Midwest nice. It's a thing. The humility is there. I do also wonder about what our capacity is to push back. I sometimes feel, this is perhaps unfair, but I sometimes feel like the land trust world were the kids that got beat up on the playground a lot and have this belief that if you stand there and you take the hits, eventually the bully will come to his senses. Or if you stand there and you take the hits, it won't hurt after a while because you can't feel it anymore. And not that I want to start playground fights, But I do wonder if the land trust world, the land trust community has the not just the stomach, but also the personality to stand more strongly for the things that we value deeply, which includes this idea that there's no one right way to think, no one correct way to think. So I do worry. I think honestly, right now, if anything keeps me up at night, it's just that is, and whoever your imaginary bully is, if it's a particular politician, if it's a department, if it's a funder, kind of doesn't matter. But do we have the chutzpah to not just get punched over and over, thinking that eventually it will stop hurting? I think some of the places where we're getting our information from, I was reminded the other day that not everyone is sitting around listening to New York Times podcasts while on the treadmill at night, right? I mean, like, that hour and 20-minute deep dive into the origin of political theory apparently isn't as exciting as I think it is. So it's those sound bites. What did I hear in 30 seconds on my way from point A to point B?
About what are the benefits and the downsides of, by and large, land trusts being apolitical? Because conservation has always been bipartisan or tripartisan, if you're libertarian, I guess. I would say I'm hard pressed, but I can't think of any land conservancy out there that has taken political stances or has a litmus test for who can be on their board or who they'll deal with as a landowner or a partner or a supporter. What are the benefits of that in today's world? And what are the downsides of that in today's world?
I think there's one really good example, and kudos to Tom Nelson and the Leelanau Conservancy for thinking very deeply about this conversation. So as I understand it, the Leelanau Conservancy has an internal policy committee, and it's not the kind of governance and policy committee that most organizations have. It is a public policy committee, but very purposely with small p's on the policy. And so what they've done is they've started to institutionalize the idea that they have beliefs and values, and those get expressed in the ways that they do their work. But their litmus test for, is it a policy issue that matters to them, is, does it impact their ability to do conservation? And if the answer is yes, or it has an potential future impact on their ability to protect the places that they've already conserved, then that's the place where they stand up. I think the flip to that, without naming any names, is the larger number of groups I hear who say things like, well, we don't want to offend a donor, or, this foundation's been really good to us, and we don't want to ruffle feathers there because we don't know what their beliefs are. I find that harder and harder to stomach, to be blunt. That, that's the old phrase, when you stand for nothing, or when you don't make a decision, you stand for nothing, ultimately. And to me, it's more and more what that feels like. I understand the reluctance to have a viewpoint, but if you don't have any viewpoint at all, I don't really know what you're for. So Leelanau's one is actually probably one of the very few that I know have spent that deliberate time thinking about public policy. I think that's worked well for them to date because it's very honed in on their ability to do conservation work. They don't have a position on energy efficient light bulbs. I'm sure the individuals do, but the organization doesn't. They don't have a position on electric vehicles. They have a position on water quality as affecting their conservation land. They have an opinion on gravel mining, things like that. And I think I feel like that's the obvious step for a lot of the folks that we all work with, is to at least to move past we don't have an opinion because it's going to offend someone. Sure is. I mean, the color of my sweater will offend someone. But those are some of the basics that I think we need to get past. And then, I don't know, what the other part that scares me with the federal system right now is, we've always sort of assumed that politics change, right? We sort of ebb and flow based on things like that. We're watching a whole-scale dismantling of the infrastructure behind our public lands and our funding system. MK, I can remember you and I were at a meeting, less than 6 months ago, with an individual from the Climate Services Division within NOAA talking to us about nature-based climate solutions. And at the time, her comment was that they knew they would need to change language moving forward with the new administration. That's a great sentiment. She doesn't have her job anymore. So she didn't change her language because she didn't need to, because her entire program is gone. And I think we sort of make that safe assumption, like, oh, we'll ebb and flow with language. Maybe not at this moment in time. And that's what worries me about the kind of that schoolyard analogy of maybe fewer punches to the face right now.
I do think it's a little bit of a catch-22, right? So if you're a conservation group who's trying to still receive a federal grant, maybe from NOAA or other sources, and let's say you used a word like community engagement in your grant application, you might get flagged and you might not get your funding now. So I do think that, the choices around language become a very practical and pragmatic decision around, if we want to be able to do the work now, how can we do that and do that effectively while sticking to our values, right? So I think this is really hard. And there's really no right or easy answer. And I think folks are struggling with this. And I think it feels pretty universal among the conservation groups I'm talking to. They want to keep doing the work. They rely on federal funding to do it. What will happen if the federal funding isn't there? How will they serve their community well if the resource is gone?
And they have a big worry about the landowners that they're working with, that have already made changes, that have already agreed to things, that have already spent money, that have already adjusted. They're very worried about that. And it's like a balancing act. We're all going to have to be contortionists, I guess, to continue the work in the way in which it was intended, with the values that the land trust has, and still be able to get the federal funding for that. It is problematic. One of the things I'm hearing is that on a case-by-case basis, land trusts are having more success, on a project that was approved, getting the funding to flow, than on some of these landscape scale $27 million RCPP projects from the Natural Resource Conservation Service. Programmatically, it's been tougher to get any answers.
I'm wondering, with sort of these uncertainty questions in mind, we haven't talked about how land trusts are funded. I don't know if folks who are listening know this, but land conservancies don't receive any money from state or federal government for their operating budgets unless it's specific programmatic dollars. MaryKay, can you talk about the funding model for land trusts? If you're a local or regional land trust, what does your operating model really look like?
What does the ideal operating model really look like? A good diversity of funds.
A healthy one.
A healthy and ideal would be a really solid base of yearly annual supporters that you build upon to then also create and maintain and care for major donors. For some, land conservancies means people that can give $500 a year, and sometimes that means people that can give $50,000 a year. So individual giving is the core of any land conservancy's annual budget, or should be, because we're place-based. The people who love where you are the people who are going to support the organizations day in, day out. On top of that, they have foundations, private foundations. Private foundations are really worried about their constituents, their grantees, and how everything that's happening with the federal government is going to affect them. At the same time, they recognize private philanthropy cannot fill the gap, but what can they do to adjust their funding? And it's not just about land conservation. There's a lot of needs and a lot of pain out there in the community, in our communities right now. So their foundations are looking at how do we adjust. But private philanthropy, private foundations, and then the public grants do come in the way of project-based. And so, yes, you may hire or pay for a staff person's time to do this large project through the funding from a federal grant, but it's you're absolutely right, Megan, that it's not that we have federal grants that support general operations. The other two parts are corporate giving and endowments. So as forever organizations, land trusts, and land conservancies are working very hard to build endowments to ensure that they will be there for the long term. And so income off of the endowments also helps with budgeting. And then, of course, we have to worry about a recession and what that might be for having that income for their budgets. One thing I will say is that division, that pie that makes up the budgeting for every land trust, ebbs and flows. And we do have land trusts that had a lot of federal grants. I have one land trust that just had to layoff isn't the correct word for it because they ended their jobs because the huge grant did not come through from Farm Bill grant from NRCS, and it's real. It's real. That was 40% of their staff that they laid off. In another year, they might not have had that big influx of federal funding into their budget, and it might have been different. So that is the other thing, is that it does ebb and flow. And it ebbs and flows based on state programs and availability of GLRI funds and all kinds of things. So
How can folks who are listening find out about their local land trust? Where would you advise them to go to learn about the land trust closest to them?
I have a passion for ensuring that people with disabilities have access to nature. And one of the things that we talk about with land trusts is that your webpage is your front door to your organization, and it needs to be accessible, by all kinds of people, and all kinds of people with disabilities and without disabilities. That is, for me, that is, and I know it might be a generational thing. Maybe it's an Instagram instead, but web pages, I think, are the front door. For the Land Trust Alliance, you can go on the Land Trust Alliance website and you can find a land trust, and you can put in where you're located, and it will tell you the land trusts that are in the area. Sometimes they're national land trusts that happen to work in your area, but they will also include local land trusts that are around you. But we only have members of the Land Trust Alliance, and some of the land trusts in Michigan are members of Heart of the Lakes. Some are members of both. And as the Land Trust Alliance as a national organization, when you go deep into regional, local, where you are, go to your state Land Trust Association. Go to Heart of the Lakes. They're the folks that have the pulse of every land trust in the state.
MK, you and I have talked a lot in the past about developing accessible spaces for those with disabilities. Remind me the name of the guide you developed with the Alliance for doing that.
Open to All, a disability inclusion guide for land trusts. It is available to everyone on Land Trust Alliance website. The proudest thing I've done in my career is spearheaded the effort to create this. It's very near and dear to my heart because I do have an adult son with disabilities, And so I lived this for 26 years now of really thinking about how do we access nature with Jack. And so Open to All, a disability inclusion guide for land trusts, is a guidebook, and it is so much more. Every time I have a reason to go back and look at it, I'm like, wow, this is really good. The other thing I'm really proud of is that it is an inclusion guide in general. 80% of what is in this guide would apply to any kind of inclusion activities that a land trust is taking on. And we go through, like, it's from soup to nuts. So we talk about what is a disability? What are the different kinds of disabilities? Where do you go to partner with people with disabilities to invite them inside your organizations as board members, as staff members, as volunteers, as well as one of the co-authors, Bonnie Lukowitz, one of the co-authors is fond of saying, it's not true that if you build it, they will come. If you build it and they know about it and it's interesting and they want to, they will come. So how do you reach out to community organizations to work together? And that's true for any kind of inclusion activity, any faction of people for which you feel like your land trust has not paid enough attention to making sure that they feel included. So I'm really thank you for returning to that, Jonathan, because I'm really proud of it, and I do think it's an incredibly helpful guide.
Thanks as always to the C.S. Mott Foundation and the Conservation Fund for support of Ramble and Mosey. Thought leadership provided by Parallel Solutions, production by Anna Moya. I want to thank all of you for joining us today, but especially Mary-Kay and Megan. This has been a really, really fun conversation, and one that I know we're going to dive deeper into more in the future.
I honestly had no idea it would be this much fun, and I'm really happy that you asked me to be a part of it. Thank you.
Take care, everyone. Catch you all soon.